This is the story of Sam and Bernard and Frosty Gully. Well, as the name suggests, Frosty Gully was a cold place. And indeed it was that winter afternoon when Sam and Bernard had got permission from their mum to walk down to Frosty Gully. It was the winter holidays, and as usual, Sam was bored. And the night before, Bernard had asked his dad about the old tungsten mine down Frosty Gully, because their dad had told them about that before. And indeed there was, about 50 years before Sam and Bernard lived on the ridge, down in Frosty Gully, some men had dug a tungsten mine. And for about 20 years they got the minerals out, but then it became dilapidated and derelict. Sam and Bernard had never been there, but they asked their dad about it a number of times, and they knew exactly where Frosty Gully was. And Dad had always said, one day when you're old enough, you can go down to Frosty Gully. Well, early that morning they'd asked their mum, "Mum, can we go down to Frosty Gully?" So she'd packed them a lunch. They'd put on some warm clothes and gloves and their big strong boots. And she made them promise, you will not go in the mine shaft and you'll be back by 4:30. So they said, "Yes, Mum, no problems." So as they set off that winter's morning, the frost was white. Even in the back paddock, the frost was white and crunched under their shoes. Their breath hung in the air like a white mist, and they had to walk very fast to stay warm. "Zini, come on, girl. Sit. Good girl." So down they went into Frosty Gully. It took about 2 hours to get there. It was a good 4 or 5 miles. It was a long way. And when they got there, they walked down the valley, and then they saw it. Some old derelict buildings, rusting tin, and the mine shaft. Now the mine shaft was all boarded up. Couldn't get in it, which was why their mum had said, yes, it's okay to go, because she knew they couldn't get into any trouble there. But being young boys, they had a good poke around. They got in these old sheds and they read the old newspapers, and they found all this old junk there. There'd been possums in there, and it was a bit of a mess. But down the river a tiny little way, Sam had gone exploring in this thick jungly bush. Absolutely impenetrable it looked, but Sam had crawled in under it, and in under there, in under an old tree, Sam had found, guess what? Guess what, Zini? Sam had found a truck, an old rusty truck that they'd used in the mines. So he yelled out, "Bernard! Bernard, come and look at this!" So that's what they did. Bernard came running down, crawled in under this undergrowth, and there in under this tree was this old truck. And they got poking around in this old truck. And on the back of the truck was a big tin box. It was huge, massive thing. And they opened up the lid. And in this box were dozens of old tools. Spanners and hammers and wrenches and, beautiful old tools. Now they were rusty. Sam and Bernard loved their dad's workshop. So they thought, what about if we carried all these tools up to Dad's workshop? I'm sure they'd come in handy for his tractor, for his saw, for his little steam engine. All of these things out in Dad's sheds and in his blacksmith shop, they just knew he would love these tools. So they got their packs and they filled them with these big, heavy iron tools. They had their lunch, brewed up a pot of tea, and they lugged 50 pounds of old steel tools up Frosty Gully. It was still frosty because it was so cold. Right up the back of the ridge and then down to their house. And they got home 29 minutes past 4. So Mum was happy. The next day, they cleaned up all the tools on the back veranda. They got some iron, some steel wool, and some sandpaper, and some oil. And those tools looked beautiful when they were finished, nearly new. All the adjustable wrenches, the mechanisms worked beautifully. All the other tools were beautiful, nearly shiny. And they put them in the bottom of Dad's toolbox. Then they forgot about it until next summer, when Dad's thresher machine for harvesting the hay broke down. And he said, "Oh no, it's the dragon rod has gone. I'll need a new Wimby Aspie for that, and I can't get it off because I haven't got a 1¼ inch shifter." Now Sam, he'd remembered about the tools, and he said to Dad, "Dad, we have got a 1¼ inch shifter. I'll show you." And Sam pulled out the big box of tools that they'd put there the previous winter. And Sam proudly held up this 1¼ inch shifter. And his dad went, "Oh, Sam, where did that come from? I never had that." And Sam looked at Bernard. And Bernard looked at Sam. And they knew they had to come clean. So they said, "Well, Dad, we went down to Frosty Gully, down to the tungsten mine last winter." And Dad said, "Yes, you had a great time poking around there." And Sam said, "Well, we found some tools in an old truck. And, we brought them back up here because we thought you might like them." And Dad sort of went a bit quizzical. And he said, "You mean that old rusty truck that hasn't moved for 54 years under the tree?" And Sam said, "Yeah, that's the one." And their dad said, "Oh, no, that belonged to Stumpy Johnson, old Stumpy Johnson, the mine manager. He'd just parked it there under that tree. He was going to come back and get it. And you've taken all his tools. Oh, I'm going to have to report you to the police for this. Theft of valuable tools." "But Dad," said Sam, "they were old and rusty. They'd been there for 54 years. No one wanted them." And Bernard was smarter. He knew that Dad was joking with him. He knew that Dad was pulling their leg. So Bernard said to Dad, "Dad, those tools hadn't been used. They were never going to be used. They were anyone's to claim." And Dad said, "Yeah, you did very well. These tools will come in very, very handy, especially when I make the new billy cart for you guys next year." And that's another story.